It was supposed to be a routine flight. Then both engines died at 28,000 feet. 267 passengers. No power. 12 minutes until impact. A quiet woman from seat 7F walked into the cockpit and gave orders that saved everyone. When F-22 pilots heard her call sign, Falcon, over the radio, they saluted immediately. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning started like any other Tuesday. Sarah Mitchell stood in line at gate 23, boarding pass in hand, watching families say goodbye and business travelers check their phones one last time. She wore simple jeans, a black jacket, and white sneakers. Her brown hair was tied back in a neat ponytail. Nothing about her stood out. She looked like 1,000 other passengers moving through the airport that day. The airport buzzed with its usual energy. Coffee shop workers called out drink orders. Gate agents made boarding announcements. Children ran between seats while parents tried to keep them contained. Business travelers typed frantically on laptops, squeezing in last-minute work. Elderly couples sat patiently, hands folded, watching the chaos with knowing smiles. Sarah had seen this scene countless times. She'd flown through this airport at least 50 times in the past 2 years alone. Before that, she'd flown through hundreds of other airports. Military bases around the world. Secret airfields whose names didn't appear on any map. Testing facilities where experimental aircraft pushed the boundaries of what humans could survive. But those days were behind her now. Or so she'd thought. She handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who smiled without really seeing her. "Have a good flight, ma'am." Sarah smiled back and walked down the jet bridge. She'd perfected this over the years. The art of being invisible. Of blending in so completely that people looked right through her. It was safer this way. Easier. After everything she'd done, after everywhere she'd been, anonymity felt like a gift. The jet bridge smelled like recycled air and jet fuel. The familiar scent triggered memories. Good ones and difficult ones. Missions that had gone perfectly and missions that had nearly ended in disaster. Faces of pilots she'd trained. Some of them were still flying. Others had retired. A few were gone, lost in training accidents or operations that remained classified even now. She shook off the memories and focused on the present. Today she was just another passenger. Nothing more. She found her seat. 7F, window seat. Perfect. She could watch the sky and be left alone. The businessman in 7E was already settled, typing on his laptop with intense focus. He wore an expensive suit and shoes polished to a mirror shine. His wedding ring caught the light as his fingers flew across the keyboard. He glanced up when Sarah approached, nodded politely without really seeing her, then went back to his work. By the time they took off, he would forget she existed. Just another passenger in another seat on another flight. Exactly as she preferred. Sarah placed her small bag in the overhead compartment and sat down. She pulled out a book, fastened her seatbelt, and waited. The book was a thriller she'd read twice before. She wasn't really reading for the story anymore. She just needed something to occupy her hands and eyes, to give her a reason not to make conversation with seatmates who might ask questions. "Where are you from? What do you do? Where are you headed?" Simple questions that most people answered easily. Questions that she had to dodge carefully. Questions that could lead to follow-ups she definitely couldn't answer. So she read. And people left her alone. Around her, the usual chaos of boarding played out. A mother struggled down the aisle with 2 small children, a diaper bag, and 3 carry-on items that definitely exceeded the airline's size limits. The flight attendants helped her stow everything, smiling professionally while clearly wishing passengers would follow the rules. Behind them, a college student with oversized headphones bobbed his head to music only he could hear. An elderly woman asked the flight attendant 3 times where her seat was, each time forgetting the answer before she reached it. A man in a wrinkled shirt argued loudly on his phone about a business deal, oblivious to the annoyed looks from surrounding passengers. Sarah tuned it all out. She'd been flying for 35 years. First in tiny training planes that shook in light wind. Then in fighters that could break the sound barrier before most people finished their morning coffee. Then in experimental aircraft so advanced that most people didn't know they existed. She'd flown more hours than the pilots up front probably had combined. She'd experienced every type of passenger, every kind of delay, every variety of airport frustration. Nothing surprised her anymore. Nothing bothered her. She'd learned to exist in airports and aircraft like a ghost. Present but unnoticed. The boarding process took 20 minutes. Finally, everyone was seated. The gate agent closed the aircraft door with a solid thunk. The captain's voice came over the speakers, calm and routine. "Good morning, folks. This is Captain Mike Harrison. We're showing an on-time departure this morning. Flight time to our destination will be approximately 3 hours and 45 minutes. Weather looks good along the route. Should be a smooth flight. Sit back, relax, and we'll have you there before you know it." The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Sarah didn't watch. She'd memorized these demonstrations decades ago. Knew every word, every gesture. Could probably deliver the presentation herself in her sleep. The businessman beside her kept typing, also ignoring the demonstration. A teenager across the aisle scrolled through social media, her thumbs moving in a blur. Most passengers gave the safety demonstration the same attention they'd give to wallpaper. Background noise. Required procedure. Nothing that would ever actually matter. Sarah knew better. She'd seen too many emergencies. Had survived too many situations where those safety procedures had meant the difference between life and death. But she kept that knowledge to herself. She wasn't here to lecture anyone. She was here to be nobody. The plane pushed back from the gate. The engine spooled up with a rising whine that Sarah's trained ear immediately recognized. Both engines sounded healthy. Strong. Operating within normal parameters. The aircraft was a Boeing 777, one of the most reliable commercial aircraft ever built. Good safety record. Excellent engineering. Redundant systems protecting against almost every conceivable failure. They taxied to the runway, falling into line behind 2 other aircraft. Sarah watched the wings flex slightly as they rolled over uneven pavement. Normal. Expected. The wings were designed to flex, to absorb stress, to bend rather than break. Their turn came. The aircraft rolled onto the runway, lined up with the centerline, and stopped. The engines spooled up to full takeoff power. Even through the cabin walls, Sarah could hear them reach their proper thrust level. The brakes released. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, pushing passengers back into their seats with gentle but steady force. The nose lifted. The main wheels left the ground. And United Flight 2847 climbed into the clear blue sky with 267 people aboard. Sarah closed her eyes and listened. Not to music. Just to the aircraft. The sound of the engines. The slight vibration through the fuselage. The change in air pressure as they climbed. The subtle shift in the wing's angle of attack as the pilots adjusted for optimal climb performance. Her body knew these things instinctively. Decades of flying had taught her to feel what an aircraft was doing, to sense problems before instruments showed them. She'd developed this ability through thousands of hours in cockpits, through hundreds of emergencies both real and simulated, through decades of experience that had burned this knowledge into her nervous system at a level deeper than conscious thought. Everything felt normal. The climb was smooth, steady, properly executed. She relaxed slightly and opened her book. The flight leveled off at 30,000 feet. The seatbelt sign went dark with a soft chime. Flight attendants unbuckled from their jump seats and began their beverage service. Sarah accepted a ginger ale when the cart reached her row. The businessman beside her ordered coffee, black, no sugar, and barely glanced up from his laptop. Behind them, someone laughed at something on their screen. A baby cried softly several rows back, then quieted as its mother soothed it. Two women in the row ahead discussed a conference they were attending. Normal conversation. Normal sounds. Normal everything. Routine. Unremarkable. Safe. Exactly the kind of flight that passengers would forget before their luggage appeared on the carousel. Then Sarah felt it. A vibration. Small. Subtle. Most passengers wouldn't notice. The businessman beside her showed no reaction. The women ahead kept talking. The baby stayed quiet. But Sarah felt it immediately. Her eyes lifted from her book. She didn't move otherwise. Didn't shift position. Didn't look around. Just listened. Felt. Analyzed. The vibration had a specific pattern. Not turbulence. Turbulence was random, chaotic, caused by air movements. This was regular. Rhythmic. Something mechanical rather than atmospheric. She'd felt similar vibrations before. In aircraft pushed beyond normal operational limits. In systems beginning to fail under stress they weren't designed to handle. In situations that started small and grew into emergencies if not caught early. She waited. Sometimes vibrations smoothed out. Sometimes they were nothing. A temporary imbalance that corrected itself. A minor adjustment as systems recalibrated. Nothing to worry about. This one didn't smooth out. 5 minutes passed. The vibration grew slightly stronger. Not dramatically. Most passengers still wouldn't notice. But Sarah's trained senses picked up the change immediately. She put her book down slowly, casually, as if simply taking a break from reading. Her eyes moved to the window. She watched the wing. Watched the engine. Looked for anything unusual. Smoke. Fluid leaks. Unusual movement. Ice formation. Anything that might explain what she was feeling. Nothing visible. The engine looked normal from the outside. But the vibration was definitely wrong. It had a frequency that suggested internal mechanical stress. Something spinning that shouldn't be. Or something that should be spinning but wasn't balanced properly. 10 minutes after she first felt it, the aircraft shuddered. Hard. This time passengers noticed. Heads lifted from screens and books. Conversations paused. The businessman's coffee sloshed in his cup, and he grabbed it quickly to prevent a spill. What was that? Someone asked behind her, voice tight with concern. Just turbulence, someone else replied, trying to sound confident but not quite succeeding. But Sarah knew it wasn't turbulence. The movement was too regular. Too mechanical. This was a system failure. She just didn't know which system yet. The seatbelt sign illuminated with its soft chime. The captain's voice came over the speakers, professionally calm. Folks, we're experiencing some turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please be seated. Sarah heard something beneath the professional calm. A tightness. A controlled stress. The voice of someone managing a situation that was more than routine. She'd heard that tone countless times. From her own voice during emergencies. From other pilots she'd flown with. From instructors handling crises in simulators. It was the voice of someone trying to project calm while dealing with a problem they weren't ready to announce yet. She fastened her seatbelt and watched the flight attendants. They moved quickly to their jump seats. Too quickly. Their faces showed professional calm, but their movements revealed urgency. They'd received instructions from the cockpit. Instructions that told them this was serious. The aircraft dropped suddenly. Not a gentle dip. Not the smooth descent of turbulence. A real drop that lifted passengers against their seatbelts. Screams erupted through the cabin. Drinks flew upward. Loose items that hadn't been stowed properly floated for a moment before crashing back down. The drop lasted 3 seconds that felt like 30. Then the aircraft caught itself. Stabilized. But it wasn't flying right. Sarah could feel it immediately. The angle was wrong. The engine sound had changed. They were still flying, still maintaining basic control, but something fundamental had shifted. She looked out the window at the left engine. The cowling looked normal from the outside. But something about the way it was running felt off to her trained senses. The vibration pattern had changed. The sound was different. This engine wasn't producing full power anymore. Her mind ran through possibilities. Mechanical failure. Computer malfunction. Fuel system problem. Dozens of potential causes, each with different implications for what would happen next. In the cockpit, Captain Mike Harrison was fighting with controls that weren't responding the way they should. His hands gripped the yoke, making inputs that should have resulted in smooth corrections. Instead, the aircraft responded slowly, sluggishly, as if fighting against him. Mike had been flying commercially for 23 years. Before that, he'd been in the Air Force, flying cargo planes. He'd seen his share of problems over the years. Engine failures. Hydraulic issues. Electrical problems. Weather emergencies. He'd trained for all of them, handled several real ones, and brought every aircraft home safely. But he'd never felt anything like this. "Jennifer, what's happening?" he asked his first officer, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was racing. First Officer Jennifer Park sat in the right seat, her fingers flying across the touchscreen displays. She pulled up system pages, ran through checklists, cross-referenced error codes. Jennifer had 15 years of experience, had flown for 2 different airlines, had excellent technical knowledge. Right now, her technical knowledge was telling her things that shouldn't be possible. "Hydraulics showing fluctuations across all 3 systems," she reported, her voice tight. "Primary flight computer is giving me multiple error codes. I'm seeing electrical issues on backup systems. Mike, these systems aren't supposed to affect each other. They're independent. I know that. But look at my controls." Jennifer watched as Mike moved the yoke. The aircraft's response was delayed, mushy, wrong. As if there were layers of mechanical failure between his inputs and the actual control surfaces. "This isn't possible," she whispered. But it was happening. "Left engine's losing power," Jennifer said suddenly, her eyes locked on the engine instruments. Mike saw it on his displays at the same moment. The left engine's readings were dropping. Not failing completely. Just losing thrust steadily, consistently. Enough to create asymmetric thrust that was trying to yaw the aircraft to the left. He compensated with rudder input, but even that felt wrong. The rudder was responding, but slowly, as if hydraulic pressure was degraded. "How bad?" he asked. "Dropping through 80%. 75. Still dropping." "Declare an emergency," Mike said, his voice firm despite the fear trying to grip his chest. "Get me vectors to the nearest airport with adequate runway length." Jennifer keyed her radio, forcing her voice to stay professional. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. United 2847 experiencing multiple system failures and engine power loss. Requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport." The controller's voice came back instantly. Even through the radio, they could hear the shift from routine to urgent. "United 2847, roger your Mayday. Nearest suitable is regional airport, bearing 035, 40 nautical miles. Runway 17, 9,000 feet. Descend and maintain 15,000. Emergency equipment is being notified. United 2847, descending to 15,000, Jennifer confirmed. She looked at Mike. Regional airport. That'll work. 9,000 feet is plenty. Then the right engine's warnings lit up. Mike watched in disbelief as the right engine also began losing power. Not as fast as the left. But definitely degrading. Jennifer. I see it, she said, her voice now showing the fear they both felt. Right engine dropping through 90%. This isn't happening, Mike said. But even as he spoke, he knew it was happening. Both engines were dying. Hydraulics were failing. Electrical systems were glitching. And they had 267 people depending on them to figure this out. Run the dual-engine failure checklist, he ordered. Jennifer pulled up the checklist on her display. Her hands were shaking slightly now. She'd practiced this scenario in simulators. Every commercial pilot had. But simulators couldn't replicate the terror of actually experiencing it. Of knowing that real people's lives depended on every decision, every action, every second. Dual engine failure checklist, she began reading. Attempt engine restart. Setting ignition to continuous. They went through the restart procedures. On the left engine first, then the right. The procedures that should have brought the engines back to life if the failures were temporary, if the problems were fixable. Nothing happened. Both engines continued losing power. Restart unsuccessful, Jennifer reported, her voice cracking slightly. In the cabin, passengers knew something was seriously wrong now. The engine noise had changed completely. Anyone who'd flown more than a few times could hear the difference. The smooth, steady roar of properly functioning jet engines had been replaced by something wrong. Something that sounded weak, failing, dying. The aircraft's attitude felt wrong too. The nose was angled down more than it should be for normal descent. They could feel it in their bodies. That subtle sense that told you something was off even if you didn't have technical knowledge to explain what. Are we crashing? A woman's voice called out, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. The question hung in the air like smoke. Please remain calm, a flight attendant said, her voice professionally composed. But her face showed genuine fear. She'd been briefed by the cockpit. She knew how serious this was. Whispers spread through the cabin like wildfire. Passengers turned to each other, seeking reassurance, finding only shared fear. Children began crying, picking up on the adult tension. Parents tried to soothe them while fighting their own panic. A middle-aged man in row 12 started hyperventilating. His wife grabbed his arm, trying to calm him, her own face pale with terror. A teenage girl pulled out her phone with shaking hands, typing messages to people she loved, messages that might be her last words to them. An elderly couple in row 15 held hands across the aisle. They'd been married 60 years. They'd survived wars, illnesses, financial crises. They'd always assumed they'd die in their sleep, peacefully, in their own bed. Not like this. Not 30,000 feet in the air in an aircraft that was falling from the sky. This was real terror. Not the abstract fear of turbulence. Not the mild anxiety some people felt during takeoff. This was the bone-deep understanding that death was a real possibility. That the hundreds of flights these passengers had taken safely meant nothing when confronted with catastrophic failure. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. The businessman in 7E grabbed her arm reflexively, his laptop forgotten. Ma'am, you need to stay seated. We're in an emergency. She looked at him with eyes that were absolutely calm, absolutely focused. Eyes that had seen combat. Eyes that had made life and death decisions affecting thousands of people. Eyes that showed no fear, only determination. I know, she said quietly but firmly. That's why I need to get to the cockpit. What? You can't just. But she was already moving forward, pulling free gently but firmly. A flight attendant blocked the aisle ahead, a young woman barely out of training, her face pale but determined to do her job. "Ma'am, please return to your seat immediately," the flight attendant said, her voice shaking slightly. "We're in an emergency situation." "I know exactly what kind of emergency you're in," Sarah said, her voice low and commanding without being loud. "Both engines are failing. You're losing hydraulic pressure across multiple systems. Your pilots are dealing with cascading failures they've never trained for. I need to speak to the captain right now." The flight attendant blinked, momentarily stunned. "How do you know? Who are you?" "Someone who can help. Let me through." Something in her voice, in her bearing, in the absolute certainty she projected made the flight attendant step aside. Sarah moved past her toward the cockpit door. She knocked 3 times. Firm. Authoritative. The kind of knock that conveyed urgency without panic. The door opened a crack. A senior flight attendant peered out, her face showing the strain of barely controlled fear. She'd been in aviation for 20 years, had experienced her share of rough flights, but nothing like this. "You can't be here," she started to say. "Tell the captain I'm a military aviator with tactical emergency experience," Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through the woman's protests. "Tell him I can help with what's happening. Tell him now. Every second counts." The flight attendant's eyes widened. She looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and saw something in her bearing, her confidence, her absolute calm that made her nod. The door closed. 10 seconds passed. Behind Sarah, passengers were screaming. The aircraft continued its descent toward terrain that was rapidly approaching. Time was running out. Then the door opened again. Captain Harrison's face appeared, streaked with sweat despite the cool cockpit temperature, his eyes desperate, haunted by the knowledge that he was running out of options. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Dead serious. What's your status?" "Both engines failing. Left engine at 40% and dropping. Right at 60% and dropping. All 3 hydraulic systems degrading. Fly-by-wire computers giving me partial control at best. We're at 18,000 feet and dropping 500 feet per minute." He paused, did the math that terrified him. "We've got maybe 15 minutes before we're on the ground whether we want to be or not. And I don't have anywhere flat enough to land except that airport 40 miles away." Sarah stepped into the cockpit. Her eyes scanned every instrument, every display, every warning light with the speed of someone who'd spent decades processing complex information under pressure. Her gaze moved systematically. Engine instruments. Hydraulic pressure gauges. Electrical system status. Flight control positions. Altitude. Airspeed. Descent rate. Glide ratio. She absorbed the complete picture of their emergency in less than 5 seconds. The kind of rapid assessment that came from years of training in aircraft where hesitation meant death. Where split-second decisions separated survival from disaster. The situation was bad. Worse than most commercial emergencies. They were essentially in a glider now, a very heavy, very complicated glider with 267 people aboard. But it wasn't hopeless. Not yet. "You've got more than nothing," she said, her voice carrying absolute certainty that somehow made Mike believe her despite every instinct screaming that they were doomed. "You have ram air turbine for emergency power. You have manual reversion capability on some flight controls. You have altitude and you have airspeed. What you don't have is time. So we need to stop thinking about this as a normal emergency and start thinking about it as a tactical problem that requires unconventional solutions." Mike stared at her. His training, his experience, every regulation he'd ever followed said he should refuse help from an unauthorized passenger. Should maintain command authority. Should follow established protocols even if those protocols were failing. But his instruments said he had maybe 15 minutes before forced landing. His training said this situation exceeded normal emergency procedures. And this woman's eyes showed absolute confidence and zero doubt. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. Someone who's landed aircraft with worse damage than this. Now listen carefully. First officer, I need you to pull up your hydraulic system schematic. Jennifer's fingers moved automatically, pulling up the display even as her mind struggled to process what was happening. A passenger was giving them orders. A passenger who somehow knew their aircraft systems. A passenger who talked like a military pilot. The hydraulic schematic appeared on the center display. Sarah studied it for 3 seconds. You're showing degraded pressure on all 3 systems, but you're not at 0 yet. System 3 still has 40%. That's enough for manual reversion on some controls. Captain, switch to alternate control mode. Now. Mike's hand moved to the mode selector, hesitating only a moment before following her instruction. The control field changed immediately in his hands. Better? She asked. Yes, Mike admitted, surprised. I've got more response. Good. That's because you're bypassing the failing computers and using direct hydraulic connections. You'll have less precision, but more authority. Now, first officer, calculate our current glide ratio accounting for aircraft weight and atmospheric conditions. Jennifer blinked. Our what? Glide ratio. How many miles forward you can travel for each 1,000 feet of altitude you lose. You need to know if you can reach that airport. Jennifer's fingers flew across her display, pulling up performance data, running calculations. Approximately 15 to 1 at our current weight and configuration. Good. That gives you adequate range to the airport with margin to spare. Captain, you're going to need to manage your descent rate precisely. Too steep and you'll arrive with too much speed to control. Too shallow and you'll run out of altitude before the runway. I'm going to walk you through the pitch angles and timing. For the next 8 minutes, Sarah transformed the cockpit from a place of desperate crisis management into a coordinated tactical operation. Her voice remained absolutely calm, methodical, precise. The voice of someone who'd coordinated combat operations where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She guided Mike through pitch angles that seemed too aggressive but which controlled their descent rate with mathematical precision. She explained the aerodynamic principles behind each adjustment, helping him understand why his instincts were wrong and why the numbers were right. You're used to powered flight where you can adjust your descent with throttle, she explained. Without engines, you're trading altitude for distance. Every degree of pitch angle changes your glide ratio. 2 nose down and you'll gain speed but lose distance. 2 nose up and you'll lose speed and risk stalling. You need to stay in the optimal range. She had Jennifer manually calculating deployment angles for flaps and landing gear that would give them maximum aerodynamic efficiency while maintaining control authority. Numbers that weren't in any commercial pilot's training manual. When we deploy the landing gear, we're going to create massive drag, Sarah explained. The nose will want to drop hard. You'll need to counter immediately with pitch input. Don't wait to see what happens. Anticipate and act. She identified backup systems the pilots didn't know existed. Redundancies built into the aircraft that required military-level knowledge to access. Systems that Boeing engineers had installed for extreme emergencies but which weren't documented in standard pilot training. Your aircraft has manual pneumatic backup for the flaps, she showed them, pointing to a panel above Jennifer's head. If your electrical deployment fails, you can use this. It's slow and requires both of you working together, but it'll work. She showed them how to manually route hydraulic pressure through secondary channels using valves that were labeled but never used in normal operations. How to use pneumatic systems to supplement failing electrical controls. How to balance the aircraft using subtle trim adjustments that most pilots never learned because they required understanding aircraft as dynamic systems rather than just vehicles to be steered. Mike and Jennifer worked together, following her instructions, watching in amazement as the aircraft's handling improved. Not perfect. Far from normal. But better. Controllable. Enough that landing became possible instead of just wishful thinking. You're going to come in hot and steep, Sarah told Mike as the airport appeared on the horizon, a distant rectangle of concrete that represented their only hope. Steeper than any approach you've ever flown. You're going to think you're about to stall. Your instincts will scream at you to lower the nose. Don't. Trust the numbers. Trust the angle. When I tell you to deploy full flaps, you deploy immediately. No hesitation. The timing window is 3 seconds. Miss it and we won't have enough runway. Where did you learn this? Jennifer whispered, her voice filled with awe and confusion. Sarah glanced at her. Somewhere you don't have clearance to know about. Captain, inform tower we're inbound emergency. Mike keyed his radio with shaking hands. Tower, United 2847 inbound emergency. Dual engine failure. Limited flight control. 267 souls aboard. He stopped, looked at Sarah. I don't even know your name. Tell them Falcon is coordinating the emergency procedures. Mike blinked at the unusual call sign but transmitted. United 2847, emergency procedures coordinated by Falcon. There was a pause on the radio. A long pause. Then the tower controller's voice came back with a completely different tone. Professional but urgent. Respectful. Almost awed. United 2847, say again your last. Did you say Falcon? Affirmative. Falcon is coordinating our emergency approach. Another pause. United 2847, Roger. Be advised military assets are being notified of your situation. Jennifer looked at Sarah with wide eyes. Why are they notifying the military? Sarah didn't answer. She was focused on the instruments, on the approaching airport, on calculating exactly what needed to happen in the next few minutes. The radio crackled again. United 2847, Raptor flight from Regional Air Defense is vectoring to your position to provide tactical support. 2 F-22 Raptor stealth fighters appeared seemingly from nowhere. The angular, deadly-looking aircraft slid into formation on either side of the struggling 777 with precision that took Mike's breath away. He'd never seen military aircraft up close during a commercial flight. Had certainly never had fighter escorts. Inside the lead Raptor's cockpit, Major Ryan Torres and his wingman Captain Lisa Chen had been on routine air defense patrol when the emergency call came through. Standard procedure was to provide sensor support for civilian emergencies when requested. Monitor the aircraft's approach with their advanced systems. Provide real-time information to tower. Stand by in case the worst happened. Then they'd heard the name Falcon over military frequencies. Torres actually stopped breathing for a moment. His hands froze on the controls. His mind struggled to process what he'd just heard. Through his helmet radio, he heard Chen's sharp intake of breath. Did they just say Falcon? They did, Torres confirmed, his voice tight with shock. They both knew that call sign. Every fighter pilot in the world knew that call sign. Falcon wasn't just famous within military aviation. Falcon was legendary. The kind of legend that instructors referenced in hushed tones. The kind of legend whose missions were still classified decades after completion. Torres had seen Falcon's call sign in classified briefing documents at fighter weapons school. Had studied mission parameters that seemed impossible until you understood that Falcon had actually executed them successfully. Had watched gun camera footage from one of Falcon's missions during his training, footage that showed maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. Chen had heard stories about Falcon from her own instructors at Top Gun. Stories about tactical innovations that had reshaped how modern air combat was conducted. About command decisions that had prevented international conflicts from escalating into full-scale wars. About expertise so profound that it bordered on supernatural. Falcon was the pilot whose innovations were still being studied and refined. Falcon was the aviator whose tactical decisions had saved thousands of lives in conflicts most civilians never knew occurred. Falcon was the person whose identity remained classified at the highest levels, whose face most military pilots had never seen, whose real name was known only to those with top-secret clearance and need-to-know authorization. And Falcon was apparently aboard a crippled civilian aircraft coordinating emergency procedures from the cockpit. Torres transmitted, trying to keep his voice professional despite the shock coursing through him. United 2847, this is Raptor Lead. We have you visual. We're monitoring your approach. How can we assist? The voice that came back was calm, confident, unmistakably authoritative. A voice that commanded respect automatically. Raptor Lead, this is Falcon. I need real-time wind shear data at runway level. I need confirmation that runway is clear for 5 miles on final approach. And I need you to verify my calculated glide path accounting for our damaged control authority and degraded aerodynamic performance. Torres's hands moved automatically. His F-22's advanced sensors began scanning, calculating, providing information that the crippled 777's damaged systems couldn't reliably determine. But his mind was reeling. He was talking to Falcon. Actually coordinating in real time with Falcon. The legend every fighter pilot knew about but almost none had ever met. The aviator whose tactical innovations were studied in classified courses at every major military aviation school worldwide. The person whose identity remained so classified that most military personnel didn't even know Falcon's gender, let alone name or face. Falcon, wind shear minimal, less than 5 knots variation at runway level, Torres reported, his voice steady despite his internal shock. Runway is clear and all emergency vehicles are positioned. Your glide path calculations are accurate within our sensor margin. He calculated quickly, his onboard computer running numbers that made his stomach tighten. Ma'am, you're going to make it, but your margin is 80 seconds and less than 1,000 feet altitude at runway threshold. That's cutting it closer than anything I've ever seen outside combat scenarios. Copy that, Raptor Lead. That's sufficient margin. Maintain formation through landing. I may need real-time sensor data during final approach. Roger, Falcon. Happy to assist. Torres paused, then added something he'd never said to any civilian aircraft in his entire career. Something that violated about a dozen protocols. It's an honor to fly with you, ma'am. In Chen's cockpit, she rendered a formal military salute. Hand to helmet, precise and crisp, holding the position with rigid discipline. She couldn't help herself. She was flying formation with Falcon. The actual Falcon. The legend she'd heard about since her first day of flight training. Torres couldn't see her through the canopy separation between their aircraft, but he knew she'd done it. He could feel it. Because he was doing exactly the same thing. Raising his gloved hand to his helmet in a salute that acknowledged not just rank or position, but genuine excellence. The kind of achievement that transcended normal recognition. They were saluting someone aboard a civilian aircraft. Someone who technically held no command authority over them. Someone who wasn't even in their chain of command. It violated protocols and regulations. But they were saluting Falcon. And that transcended protocol. In military aviation, salutes were normally rendered for rank, for authority, for formal occasions defined by regulation. But there was another kind of salute. Informal. Spontaneous. Given not because regulations required it, but because respect demanded it. The salute that pilots gave when they witnessed something extraordinary. When they encountered excellence so profound that acknowledgement became necessary. Torres had rendered such salutes perhaps 3 times in his entire career. Once for his first squadron commander who'd saved his life during a training accident by making a split-second decision that violated procedure but prevented disaster. Once when watching a demonstration pilot at an air show execute maneuvers in a vintage aircraft that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Once when meeting a retired general who'd flown combat missions in 3 different wars and had more confirmed victories than any pilot in modern history. And now for Falcon. The legend he'd never expected to encounter. Whose presence transformed a routine escort mission into something he'd remember for the rest of his life. Inside the 777's cockpit, Mike heard the exchange over the radio and glanced at Sarah with new understanding. The military pilots knew who she was. Respected her enough to salute over military frequencies. This wasn't just any former military pilot. This was someone extraordinary. "Falcon," he said quietly, testing the call sign. "That was your call sign from military service." "Focus on the approach, Captain," Sarah replied, her attention never leaving the instruments. "We're 3 minutes from touchdown. The F-22 pilots saluted you. I heard it in their voices." "Captain Harrison," Sarah said firmly, looking at him directly. "We have 3 minutes until we either land successfully or crash. I need you completely focused on flying this aircraft. Questions can wait. Lives cannot. Understand?" Mike nodded and turned his attention back to the approach. Sarah's voice remained calm and precise. "Airspeed 160. Pitch angle 4 degrees nose up. Deploy landing gear now." Mike pulled the gear lever. The gear ground down slowly, creating massive drag. The nose wanted to drop hard. "Counter with pitch. Hold that angle. First stage flaps now." Jennifer deployed them. The aircraft shuddered but stayed on course. The runway filled the windscreen, coming up fast at a steep angle. "Full flaps on my mark," Sarah commanded. 3, 2, 1, mark. Jennifer slammed the flap lever forward. The nose pitched violently upward. Mike fought the controls, keeping them aligned. "Flare now. Gently. Let the main gear touch first." The main gear struck the runway hard. The aircraft bounced once, then settled. Mike deployed every brake they had. The aircraft rolled down the runway, bleeding speed. 5,000 feet remaining. 4,000. 3,000. 2,000. 1,000. The aircraft stopped with 300 feet of runway left. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the cockpit erupted. Mike gasped for air. Jennifer cried with relief. Behind them, 267 passengers screamed with joy and gratitude. Sarah stood calmly. "Good job, Captain. You saved everyone aboard." Mike grabbed her arm. "No. You saved us." "Who are you?" The radio crackled. "United 2847, this is Raptor Lead. Falcon, it was the highest honor of our careers to provide escort. You just saved 267 lives." Through the windows, both F-22 Raptors held formation. Inside each cockpit, the pilots rendered formal military salutes. Passengers crowded toward the cockpit, desperate to thank her. Sarah raised her hands. Everyone fell silent. "My name is classified. My service record is classified. But my call sign is Falcon. Those F-22 pilots are saluting because they know what that represents. They know I've flown missions that changed history. That's why they salute." She pulled out a business card with only a phone number and handed it to Mike. "That reaches a classified office. They'll tell you Falcon's identity requires presidential authorization to access. Today was an exception. Tomorrow I go back to being nobody." She walked toward the exit. Emergency personnel saluted as she descended the stairs. She returned their salutes and disappeared into a waiting sedan. Mike stood holding the card, watching her leave. 267 lives saved by someone we'll never fully know. Jennifer nodded. Falcon's real. And Falcon just proved legends exist for a reason. The sedan drove away, carrying a legend back to anonymity, leaving behind people alive because someone extraordinary had been sitting quietly in seat 7F. Sometimes heroes hide in plain sight. Waiting. Watching. Ready to act when the world needs them most.